for this financial year. And welcome everyone on this wet and rather grey Hamilton day. So it's a pleasure to be in a nice cosy room with you all, talking about all things finance. So I'm going to hand just over to Moko to open our meeting this morning with a karakia and recognising some special events. Kia ora.
Kia ora tātou. The karakia this morning, just want to acknowledge the passing of Ryan's mum this morning in my karakia. And so that's about the only major acknowledgement that I want to make in my karakia this morning. Ke tākina mai tēnei karakia kia tukuna tikia io. Io nui oroa io ngā taketake o te wānanga tēnei mātou e whakakoropiko aki ana kia rangi nui rawa ka papa atua nuku pai mārire. Kia tākina mai tēnā tahi ana mauri ki runga anō i a rātou tahi anō te pauare te pani me te rawa kore rātou tahi anō ngā tāngata e māwiwi aki ana ki roto i ngā kokonga e whao te motu nei pai mārire. Mauri a mai tērā tahi anō te mauri ki runga anō i a tātou ngā kai kauni hera ki roto i tēnei whare a tātou e poi aki ana i tēnā tahi ana ngā rautaki o ngō tātou nei hāpori nei pai mārire. Kia pātahi anō te wairua tapu ki runga anō i ngō tātou nei kai kauni hera. A Ryan mā me tana pāpā, tēnā te wehenga mōnā tū ki tērā tua o te ārai pai mārire. Nei rawa ki ana tēnei karakia kia tākina kina mai ana ki a tātou i tēnei ata rire, pai mārire. Kia ora tātou.
Kia ora, and thank you for those beautiful words. And our heartfelt condolences go to Ryan and his family on the loss of his mum. But we know that the legacy that she leaves behind with their whānau will be something that will inspire and guide them into their future. Kia ora. Today we also have some uplifting things that are happening in our council, and I understand that it's our CEO's birthday. I think that's donuts
cake for morning tea.
Oh, cake. Yeah. Very good. Well, that's wonderful. Thank you for that. And many happy returns of the day, Lance. Many happy returns. Today also marks our winter solstice, the shortest day of the year. And so every day after today gets a little bit longer as we move towards spring and summer. Hooray, I look forward to those times. But also it marks Matariki, and there is much happening around the city in our Matariki celebration. So get onto the website, have a look at that, and get involved and participate. Thank you. It's a little bit off track from finance, but certainly things for us to be able to mark and acknowledge. And while we're doing some acknowledgements, I'd also like to extend our very best wishes to Tracy, our Finance Director, who is absent at present, and wish her very well with her recovery. She's probably watching this online and keeping an eye on us all to make sure that we get through the business of the day in an efficient way. So kia ora, Tracy, and get well. So now let's move us through into our agenda and noting our apologies. I've got a full apology for Mayor Paula, Councillor Hamilton, Councillor Huake, Councillor Taylor, Councillor Naidu Ralph, and for lateness, no, and for online, who will be joining us online, Councillor Hutt and Councillor Thompson. Sorry? Oh, and Councillor Stevie, yes, that's right. Good morning. Are there any other apologies, whānau?
Hey.
Yes.
He's probably a little bit blue because his team got thumped last night.
Yes, two games down now, aren't they? Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you for that
Chili
reminder.
House lunch, here we come.
All right, in acknowledgement of that, let's accept those apologies. All those in favour? Against? Thank you. Now, confirmation of the agenda. You'll see that on page 5, or rather the agenda today. Any comments or additions? Yep. Thank you. Amy's got that. All those in favour? Thank you. And also just noting that in Tracy's absence, Stephen Halliwell will be presenting the financial performance and strategy report. So go easy. Thank you. Very well. Have we voted on that? Thank you. Declarations of interest. Do we have any? There being none. And no one for the public forum today? Great. It's helpful. So that brings us to item 5. The minutes from previous meeting, the 27th of April. Thank you. There's no matters of accuracy to correct? Very good. All those in favour? Against? Thank you. Carried. Item 6. Our capital portfolio monitoring report, and I welcome Ian to, not sure which chair you're sitting in today, Ian, at the end of the table. Plenty of room there for you. Yep, most welcome. Thank you, Ian. Colleagues, that's page 11.
Good morning, Chair Maxine. Good morning, elected members. Here to present the 10-month financial performance for the capital program. I'm very cognisant that I'm talking today about the 30th of April result, and we're sitting here 8 days out from the financial year. So if you don't mind, a little bit later, I will just supplement just for some information on an update on the May position. But just in terms of the report, while I'll take it as being read, I'll just cover some of what I consider to be some of the highlights or some of the issues just to bring some attention to. So at the 10-month position, actual expenditure was $223 million, with associated capital revenue of $57.4 million. This was against an annual budget target of $297.3 million, and that $297.3 million represents the changes that this committee have seen previously and are seeing today that changed the annual plan approved figure based on both changes and deferrals. So that number there of $297.3 that I just mentioned doesn't acknowledge that we've already approved and up till today 77.7 in deferrals for this financial year. Staff consider those deferrals to sit at a year-end target of somewhere between 80 and 90, and I'd like to think, based on data we have as at today, that that's going to be closer to the 80 million mark than the 90 million mark. So I think that's been quite a pleasing result from our point of view in terms of deliverability. I did mention the May result, and so just by way of an update, I'll just let you know that the May results were confirmed beginning of last week, and Council, the expenditure at the end of the May was $258.7 million. So if you can do a little bit of maths in your head, but I've written it down, that was a $35.7 million increase over that April result I was just mentioned to you, and it's just an indication again of the uplift and the deliverability of the program. So we are looking like we're on target for to meet our year-end forecast. What continues to be an issue for this organisation, and it would be remiss not to acknowledge that. Our outstanding WIP at the end of April sat at $163.4 million, and just to reiterate, the outstanding WIP is what concerns us because it's capitalisation that is in service and in use but hasn't yet actually been capitalised. However, having said that, look, there is and now in excess of $90 million of projects that have had their capitalisation process completed, but they are sitting in the queue to go through the system, and staff are working very hard to get that through before the end of the financial year. Equally, though, it's been a very busy year in this space, and as at the end of May, Council had, through the staff work, had capitalised $146 million. So again, the message here is, yes, it is still a concern. It's something I think we need to be very cognizant, very aware of, but staff are putting a lot of time and effort and focus into getting this issue under control, not just for the year end, but in a permanent sense as well, so that this issue doesn't become something we talk about every meeting. HIF, I introduced a section last time called HIF, which is the Housing Infrastructure Fund, and I'm going to leave it in there if that's okay, just going forward. I know there was a discussion last week at the committee around there was a Peacock update report presented, and there was a question throughout that through that meeting around the interest-free function or features of that HIF drawdown. So just a little take a step back. So it was 180.4 million, I think, the council was approved by the government, interest-free. The mechanism and how that works is that every quarter we submit a claim through to the government based on the actual expenditure we have incurred, and they go through that. In fact, they go through it at quite a lot of detail, elected members, at a transactional level. They sign that off and they approve it, and then once it's signed off, they transfer the money across to HCC. Each of those drawdowns represents a loan agreement, and this 10-year period or 10-year interest-free period starts from the date of receipt. And that moves 10 years. At the end of that 10-year period, if it's still outstanding, what would happen then? It would be repaid and converted to interest-bearing debt. Case in point, and if I can find my bit of paper because it's topical, you here and there you'll see I've said that we've made 19 drawdowns to date. The 18th drawdown was received on the 16th of June, so just last week. So that's when that interest-free period starts for that. That's got a value of 10.8 million, and claim 19, which we've submitted, is due for payment to us on the 30th of the 6th, so in another 8 days. And so again, that's when the interest-free period will start. So just a little bit of clarity around that, because I know that question did come up, I believe it was from Councillor Ewan, and just wanted to make sure there was clarity around that. The last thing I just want to focus on is, and I've lost my bit of paper, is we've reported 8 projects having a risk attached to them. 7 are classified as orange. Orange means that they're being actively monitored by staff. 1 red would indicate that it needs a council resolution or council intervention to make a decision. I'm pleased to say, and I think maybe that red can now be updated, and it's being returned to green, because the red we're talking about was to do with the Founders Theatre, and I know there was that discussion last week, and council have resolved to make the decision they've done. So that red is now coming off the report and can be returned to green. Of the 7 orange now, I will just say at this point, one of those relates to the visitor centre at the Hamilton Gardens, and at this point, it's going to happen anyway, but I'm just going to ask General Manager Allen, who would like to speak to that, because I believe he wants to give a verbal update on that risk profile in terms of what we're talking about.
Thank you, Chris. It's probably a good idea, because I'm no doubt there would be questions from the chamber relating to that. So yes.
Yep, just a quick update, and Leanne Jordan's here as well, that can help me. Just we're pointing out, and we're talking about paragraphs 75 to 77. So council received a report last year for the visitor destination project. They approved a budget of $9.6 million to do the visitor destination. So the project's still well on track and on budget and underway, and the issue is about the funding and how we fund that project. So there's been a slowdown in there was some expected external revenue, which has been delayed and won't be available in time for the budget. So we've reprioritised some renewals and compliance budget within the visitor destinations to make up for that funding, and that funding would then be available for future projects. I'm advised by Leanne that if the council wanted to go into detail about the funding, it might have to be in PX. But I just wanted to bring your attention to that, because it's a slight change from what council had approved in late 2022. And the final part of that is, in doing the project, we want to seize an opportunity to do some work on the pavilion project, which is adjacent to the visitor arrival centre. But we'll come back to council with a full proposition on that at the next council meeting. So happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Is there more to your report, or are we now?
So on that note, I'm happy to say I'll take the risk report as read, and I'm happy to take any questions equally, Chris. And I'll just make note that we've got our Capital Projects Director, Kelly Stokes, behind me, and our Program Managers directly behind me, who are available to answer any of your specific project-based questions if needed.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Ian. Do we have some questions from the floor? Councillor Wilson.
Madam Chair, it's really a question of governance, procedure-wise. Because this last topic changes slightly from what was resolved in a motion, I'm wondering if it isn't best practice that we separate that component from accepting the report and have a further discussion in PX if there's a confidential element, just so that we can then agree upon a motion that reflects the change.
The action that needs to happen. And your
Because
guidance
otherwise
on that?
I think we're...
This is just receiving though, isn't it?
Just because this is receiving the report and saying that, for the technical term, it should be a part of the agenda, it doesn't state that we accept anything in there. However, I do agree for the purposes of the public excluded, we should have the technical term is 9.17, receiving a report. So it's perfectly fine that it is,
Okay,
as was written.
all right. But Madam Chair, you're happy that we...
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Perhaps we can move some of the discussion into our PX session and resolve to accept the report today and let that resolution stand, but leave some time maybe in our...
Yeah, if you're happy with that, I just want to be able to get a much better understanding.
Indeed.
And yeah.
So, Madam Chair, if you want to separate that out, Chris has actually crafted a draft resolution to Councillor Ewan's point. So if you want the
If that's entirely
clarity of
necessary,
resolution,
then
In the resolution to exclude public, that's where I'll be having that section added in for your full discussion and abilities.
thank you, and I'll take Amy's guidance on that. Are there any further questions of Ian's report? Councillor Bidder.
Thank you, Chair Max. I'm not sure who is best to answer this, but the citywide waters, there's a number of projects there, and I'd just like a little bit more information, sort of an update on timing in relation to getting projects completed to allow for further wastewater connections and development in the areas that have been red lighted. So if somebody is able to give me some better timeframes, that would be appreciated.
There's the capacity issues around wastewater. There's a project coming up in the, well, here we go. I've got my program manager. We've got our program manager, Surya Pandey, here, who's been more than happy to answer that question.
Thank you.
Through the chair. So our biggest program to look at the storage facilities for wastewater in the city is going very well. And we are planning to bring a report to Council in September about the selection of the sites where we want to put those storage facilities throughout the city, eight places. We have prioritized one of the sites that was really apparent that we needed to do something immediately in the Collins Road, in the Deanville area, where we were getting a number of overflows. And we are designing that at the moment. And we are hoping to deliver the facility by the end of next financial year. As for other sites, we are just holding multi-criteria analysis workshops this week, following week, and the first week of July, just to confirm. We have got a long list. We have come from a long list to a short list, and we are looking at short list, and then we will finalize what our preferred options for those storages are. And as I said, we are going to bring a report in September about where we build those. We are in the process of prioritizing further one or two sites, and hopefully they will be underway next financial year.
Thank you.
Can I just add to that, Councillor Andrew? So what Surya is talking about is our bulk storage program, but there are two other significant projects. So one is the Fitzroy diversion. So that's been done as part of Peacocks, and that's due to open by the end of this calendar year. So that provides some relief. And then Council made a decision a meeting or two ago to put another project in the annual plan called the Te Anau Split Diversion. So that's quite a good project which creates some capacity relief as well. So we're just scoping that project up at the moment. We hope to have that one up and running relatively quickly as well. So just to supplement the big projects that Suri is talking about.
Thank you, Chris.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Andrew, you happy with those outcomes? Very good, thank you. Go to Councillor Casey Cox.
Kia ora. Just a question around the Rotatuna village and the implications of the NPS on freshwater. I'm just curious, I guess, about that, the implications of that, and wondered if you could talk to that and if it's going to become an increasing issue for us at all.
Just for clarity, will the MPS become a developing issue for the council in other locations?
Yeah, for the freshwater, yeah.
As an accountant, I'm going to turn around and just see. I'm going to just ask Jonathan Brooke to come to the table and just give you a quick update on that.
Thank you.
Yep.
Kia ora.
Kia ora. Yes, it is likely to become an increasing issue. We have found with the Rotokauri arterial designation that there is some natural wetlands along that. So it's basically the new world that we live in, that we have to cater for this improved natural existing environment, and we have to manage that accordingly.
Okay, so there will potentially be some delays and deeper considerations required here.
Around the whole city.
Around the whole city. Yeah. Thank you. Just, yeah, interesting. Thank you.
And just before you go, just related to that, this is the Finance Committee, so we do really need to have an understanding of what the financial implications of that are. And so you'll be bringing that to discussions that we'll have further around the long-term plan and the need to be preparing for that in 24, 25 onwards.
Definitely, yep.
Thank you, and thank you for your good questions, Councillor Anna. Mike.
Thank you, Chair Maxine. Just referring to the deliverability issues noted in the report, I appreciate that the team are focusing on this issue, but should it continue to escalate, I'm just wondering at which point would it come back to council to help reprioritise remaining projects, or does it simply become a first come, first serve issue? This might be a Chris Allen question, sorry.
I think Chris would like to answer this question.
I'm not 100% sure of the question. So like we have a portfolio of projects to deliver. They're discrete projects, maybe apart from the renewals and compliance, and that previous discussion fitted into that a little bit, where council gave us some delegations to move things around in renewals and compliance to make sure that we were spending our money wisely on looking after assets. But all the rest are sort of discrete sort of projects. Look, we are on track for our record spend this year, so I expect that the end of year result will get close to spending $300 million. So I think in general our delivery is really, really good at the moment.
Okay.
So look, at any time council could have that discussion if they wanted to reprioritise other projects. We'd have to look at whether factors that would make them go quicker, than the other set of projects.
Yeah, I guess I was just signalling if there has been a few issues raised already around deliverability, if it was to escalate into a bigger issue, would it at that point come back to us too?
Yeah, it sort of comes back every meeting here with our deferral conversation, I guess, and the deferrals is a proxy for deliverability.
Yeah.
If we're deferring money, we're not delivering the projects to target. So there is a continual discussion here at this meeting. So this is the right meeting to talk about deliverability.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pike. Ian, just from me, in terms of the work in progress, you talk about that being possibly $90 million already in the process. I wonder if you could just expand on what the process is so that the meeting has a really good understanding of the complexity that's involved in that, rather than it, and a good understanding of how complex that can be in terms of certainly being prepared for in 8 days' time for us to close off a year in preparation for a new one.
Thanks, Chair Maxine. That's a great question, and I'm pleased you have asked to talk about the complexity, because it is a complex process. We might not want it to be. We might not like the fact that it is, but the reality is that many of the assets that this city builds are not bespoke like a car that you can go, oh, it's one asset and I'll just send it and I'll put it into my fixed asset register. They're very complex engineering assets. Equally, there's a huge amount of requirement on our engineering staff and our community staff that the assets that they are tasked with looking after for the city and ensuring that they are delivering the levels of service that the community require, that we know where they are, we know what they are, we know the condition they're in, we know the state they're in, and we have that detail around that to do that. And so when you're talking about an asset database and something north of $5 billion, there's a lot in there. So what has to happen is that the team behind me, they will build the asset and they will deliver it to a point where it is now in use for service, whether it's a road, whether it's a pipe, whether it's a community facility. That then needs to be broken down and looked at from an asset component point of view. Now, why is an asset component point of view interesting? Because what you're concerned about there is ensuring that you've got the right asset life cycles against each of those components. And for example, a pipe may last 80 years, but the valve, and I'm not an engineer, so bear with me, may last only 50 years, so that's got a different life cycle, so you need to understand that, and that componentry comes in. Roading's fascinating as well, because not only do you have the length issues, you've got the depth issues as well around top seal and base course, etc. So then they need to work through that and need to identify what those componentry is and break it down. That needs then goes off, and it needs to then be put into what we refer to as our asset management systems. We have two major ones in the organisation. RAM, which looks after our roading asset database, so that's got to hold all that detail, and the other one is IPS, which holds most of all the other assets the organisation thinks. So that now needs to go into that system and be validated and signed off around that, and then ultimately the financial values are then transferred down into our finance unit, or across the finance unit, who load it in there into what we would call colloquially the fixed asset register. And the reason I'm saying that is because the fixed asset register from a financial point of view used to have all the componentry in it, so you can imagine it was an enormous database of things that was deemed to be unwieldy and also not very efficient in terms of process. So the financial asset register tends to hold the assets on a more accumulated level, with the detail being in the asset management system. So they get they load it into the system, and a lot of staff time doing that. Gets signed off, the button gets pressed, and then voila, there it is. And once it's in service, then the depreciation starts to kick in as the system generates. So, and there's all sorts of, you'll hear things like, well, we need completion certificates, we need as-built plans. An as-built plan from a non-engineering point of view means this is what we thought we'd build, this is what we do build, this information needs to be. So there is a lot of staff time involved going through that to understand the asset at that level, and bring it through and into a finally a capitalised state. So,
thank you. And that's just not happening in a week, is it? Kind of time frames depending on the complexity of it.
Look, it's not a week, but look, again, so what are the things we face? We face volume, just sheer volume, and that's what we've talked about, the deliverability of a program, 300 million plus, 350 million plus capital program. That's what we're adding every year, and those assets are coming on constantly, so we're having to deal with that. And there's a lot of moving parts to it, and a lot of within the organisation, and it is a very collaborative approach across a number of units within council. But I'd like to think that, particularly in the last 12 months, through a couple of key appointments in a couple of key areas, that we've gone a long way to try and streamline and get a more efficient process, Councillor Chair Maxine, in that space. I think some of you may be aware of our former internal auditor, Morva Kay. She's come in there and Morva's really working with Kelly's team, really brought in some really great disciplines and some structure around that capitalisation process, and we're starting to see a genuine uplift in the movement of the data through the system.
Thank you. And we've also made some changes to the allowance for depreciation prior to them being coming into our system.
Yes, I know. I'll put my accounting hat back on. That's a really great point, because the concern being is that when it sits in work in progress, it is not depreciating, which is a concern, because if the asset actually is in use, then it should be depreciating. So to acknowledge that, we don't want to be understating our financial position at any point in time, or the depreciation expense. Our finance team assess the value of the assets that are outstanding and make an assessment on what the depreciation expense would be, and put through an entry to mimic that depreciation until such time as the formal process is completed, which means that we are not understating our position at any point in time.
Thank you. That's comforting. Thank you. Councillor Casey Cox.
Sorry, that's just made me have more questions. Sorry about that. In terms of, I'm just trying to understand our process around, so if we, for example, for a wetland, we construct it, then it becomes an asset, but if it naturally exists, it isn't an asset. Is that right? Is that how we do sort of some of these things?
Yeah, we do. It's an interesting question, and I'm loath to go outside my remit or to bore you. But
I'm just trying to understand that.
Look, it's a great asset capitalisation debate. A lot of the work, you build a pipe, it's cool, it's easy, it's tangible, you can see it. We're doing a lot more work in that, improving the landscape, improving the natural environment, and how we recognise the significant cost in doing that as an asset. Yes, it is an asset. Yes, it is recognised. It really comes down to understanding the value and the lifespan of that. But we certainly do. Yeah, it is an asset. You will find it on our asset register, and we are depreciating it because ultimately, in the day, you're looking at some point in the future, near future, far future, to replace that.
Yeah, so we depreciate a constructed wetland.
Yes, we do.
But we don't.
And somebody once said to me, short answer was yes.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, it would be good to have more conversation about that, probably offline. Yeah.
Councillor Wilson.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Maxine. Since we've opened the interesting wormhole of depreciation, I thought I might wiggle down and see if we can get some clarity for me. Do you feel that Audit New Zealand has a very clear outline to us about how we should manage depreciation against our assets?
Look, I don't know if they've got a very clear on how we manage it. Depreciation isn't very subjective from that point of view, Councillor Ewan. You follow accounting standard. Useful lives are determined based on the asset and what we've built, and the expertise from our staff to understand the life of that asset and the things. So what Audit New Zealand are always fascinated with and are always very concerned about and saying is that is the capitalisation process happening in a timely manner? Equally, is it happening at the right componentry level, and are the right asset and useful lives being applied to those componentries? And do we just have do we have a real watertight process from go to woe?
Right. So if you were to turn your mind to some of our existing bridges, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, some of our major bridges in town, we have currently, I think in the books, a replacement value of around about 35 million per bridge. But we recently built a bridge to Peacocks for 130 million. Two questions. Have I got that right? And is the 35 million the appropriate quantum? And in fact, is that, to your earlier point, an actual reflection of the replacement cost?
Okay, so it's a great question, Councillor Wilson. Again, it comes up quite a lot in discussion in the office. So now we bring onto the table the issue of revaluations and modified historic cost of the assets, if I can use technical jargon. So what's really important is that, yes, we'll build a Peacocks Bridge, and the historic cost, what are we actually going to pay a contractor, is maybe 100 million, bang. the Whitiora Bridge has been in across the river there for a number of decades now. The revaluation process, what it requires you to do for any business for that matter, but councils quite importantly, is you want to come back at every periodically and have a look at the value you're carrying your assets are to make sure it's still an accurate reflection of what they are and what they're worth. And invariably what you do is you look at the value to replace that asset today. You say, if I had to build that bridge tomorrow, it would cost me X. You then take into account its lifespan that you've gone through, and you do a modified historic cost, and you lift the revalue, the cost value of the bridge, and the higher value is then now depreciated at that higher value, so that we are not in any way understating the value of those assets. So it's quite a very critical element. So, you know, I'd say to you, we've got an asset revaluation currently underway, almost completed for our transportation assets. The question would be to understand what's coming out of them. But if you're saying, you know, I've heard in this chamber again the discussion around inflationary pressures. Well, those inflationary pressures place something on building assets, current assets. They also place quite a lot of pressure on existing assets, because when you come to do that revaluation, you're saying, what would it cost to replace them today on current costing, and that lifts the value up, and therefore that flows through into higher depreciation coming through as well.
So this review that we're currently doing on the roading infrastructure, that will include the bridges, and that will be done in time for any potential, when will that trickle through into our system?
No. Look, again, it's a great question. I think I may have mentioned in the previous report. So, look, there's been a lot of pressure to get the asset database up to date so that evaluation could be done. I believe draft results have been completed. That information has to be completed, processed, and in the system and reflected for the 30th of June.
Right. Okay. One last question, and that is, there is a suggestion by some in the community who love to write to elected members, saying everything we do in local government is wrong. There's a suggestion that we've moved from 1.67% of total asset value to 1.4 as a calculation for our depreciation. And I'm just trying to understand what that means. And maybe I thought you could help me.
I have to apologise. I don't know what who has made that statement, the context of it, or what they were making. Again, look, depreciation, to be quite simple, it's a clinical, simple mathematical calculation.
So does the Hamilton financial statement show depreciation was altered from 1.67% of total asset to 1.4% per annum, with the latter percentage remaining relatively constant for the last 20 years?
So I'm assuming, and I don't like using that word in chamber, I'm assuming from that calc what the person's done is taken a depreciation expense, divided it over the asset value, and that's where he or she has realised there is a slight percentage decrease. But again, the devil's always in the detail with those things, Councillor Yu, and you'd need to have a look and understand the mathematics of it. I mean, we do have large swathes of assets.
Ian, if I can just help out. So from my interpretation of that question, what we're talking about is our total depreciation as a percentage of our total asset book. We have assets that run over 100 years, and so and it is lumpy depending on what assets we build. So that will fluctuate as a total percentage, but the real discussion is more on what is the depreciation rate we apply to each asset, as opposed to accumulating it. And unlike some businesses who have assets like cars and computers, they will have 10 to 15% depreciation because they just have those types of assets. Whereas when we have roading and bridges that last 100 years, our depreciation rate is going to be very much lower. So, yeah.
Thank you. That was it.
Very good. So thank you, Ian, for your report. We appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you for your good answers. So I'll remind us that we're back on page 11 and that the Finance and Monitoring Committee receives the report. I'm happy to move. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Wilson. Is there any debate? would just say thank you to Ian for the presentation of his report, acknowledging that we are 8 days away from the end of a financial year, and while there is some frustration that we look at April results, it's encouraging to get a bit of an update on our May position, and we look forward to seeing the end of year. It's quite obvious that there is always a bit of a squeeze at the end of financial years to be able to fit and make sure that we are presenting the most accurate of information for our ratepayers, and trust that that can be a complex and time-consuming effort, but that we acknowledge your work in that. Kia ora, and that's it from me. Any Councillor Wilson?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Look, I obviously support receiving the report. I would like to take the opportunity to suggest that Council tries to get a little better explaining what is a very complex analysis of information that we provide. And I think you hit it on the head when you referred to the fact, Madam Chair, you know, what we do is important to the ratepayer, and the ratepayer has to try to understand what's going on. When David explains exactly his analysis of the depreciation, it all just makes sense. But if you were not dealing with the complexity of local government, and you were bringing historical commercial experience in other sectors of the industry, you would look at the way we manage things and go, oh, that doesn't make sense. And so I don't want to use the word, is there a way that in a few paragraphs we can help our ratepayers understand how we're very different to a lot of other entities and how they would manage things like depreciation? Because there is a number of our ratepayers who are convinced that all we seem to do in the accounts department is it's a black science. You know, we make things up. Where in fact, despite my attempts to find that to be true, it doesn't appear to be true at all. And when it's explained to me, I go, oh, well, yeah, no, that makes sense. So I'm just wondering if we can't come up with a simplified analysis and make that customer-facing. Yeah.
Thank you. I've noted that our General Manager has taken account of that, and will, I would expect, help us as elected members to be able to demystify some of these numbers that we presented with. Thank you. I will now put the motion up. No, I beg your pardon. Councillor Donovan.
Thanks, Chair Max. Can I just support Councillor Ewan on his comments, because I'm one of those guys that came into council, and I come from a commercial background where we studied depreciation till the bloody cows came home, and it was a very simple calculation for us, because we had machines that made things that we turned into money. And I guess in here, part of that explanation might be actually absolutely watering it down to a simple, clear message that says what our assets do. And I know that we're getting better at customer engagement, but I just wonder if there's a little narrative we can create there that says, you know, this asset does this, and just explain it like we're talking to a, dare I say it, but a 10-year-old, because that might be the easiest way for us to get the message across. And it would certainly help people like me, because I know when I came in, I take the mickey out of Tracy all the time about debits equaling credits and whatnot, but to hear it explained the way David did just before, you know, it is complex, but it could be delivered perhaps in a more easier to understand narrative. Thank you.
Accounting and then try and get into engineering.
Thank you, and that's what makes this committee fun. I will put the motion then from page 11. All those in favour? Against? Carried unanimously. Oh, sorry, it's taking your job. Apologies. Thank you. Thank you, support team. You're dismissed. Now moving into item number 7, invite Stephen to come up to the table. Now, remembering that Stephen is stepping in for Tracy, and he has with him,
Ravaz.
lovely.
So Sarah's our accounting manager, and this is her first experience at the front of the table. An experience that I'm sure she will in time get used to. But she has lots and lots of knowledge that's going to help me through this. Sorry?
Your role at council
As accounting manager. Did I not say that?
Yeah, you
I did say that.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, well, I thought seeing as the Capital Group spent all their time talking about accounting, I'll talk about engineering. Or pick up on the guidance from a general manager. So, to introduce the report.
Thank you.
So as was discussed, this is the 10th month of the year, but only 8 days away from the end of the new financial year. This report shows where our finances are in April. And on the back of that, we are forecasting our key financial metrics for the end of the year. This report shows in paragraph 5 that we are doing better than budget. But as you identified at the April meeting of this committee, our forecast showed that the end of the year had a tail on it, and it was going to push our balancing the books deficit beyond the budget deficit. At that meeting, Lance undertook to get the business to reduce expenditure during the remaining 2 months of the year, and so we don't have those financial statements for that period yet. But across the business, the finance team is aware that there have been many initiatives to hold off on non-critical expenditure, including pausing recruitment, looking at training and whether it was essential, reducing consultants' costs, and deferring maintenance. So on the back of that, as a finance team, we've got a lot of confidence that those actions will be delivered through our future financial reporting for the June year. I note that in this report, the balancing the books result on paragraph 61 shows the same result as you had previously seen with a with a $20 million balancing the books forecast deficit, which is $5 million above the budgeted deficit of $15 million. The changes that have happened in the business, or that are happening still in the business to control expenditure, have not been able to be calculated and considered for the purpose of this report. Our financial systems and the way they're developed focus on what future budgets are, and the team is being focused on delivering annual plans and annual reports and LTP stuff, and working with the business to reduce expenditure rather than building systems to capture something that our systems don't capture at the moment. So that sort of summarises at the highest level the finance report for April results, and I'll put it back to you, Chair Maxine.
Thank you. And let's go to the board for questions. Councillor Wilson.
Yeah, thanks, Chair Maxine. Thank you for your presentation. When you were describing the steps that the organisation has taken to try to minimise the balancing of the book deficit come to the end of the financial year, you had me convinced, and then you worried me when you said that we started to defer maintenance. Just walk me through how we've determined areas of maintenance to stop.
I've seen examples that I'd consider to be minor. So there's lots and lots of small things. Mm-hmm. There's nothing that I've heard from the big asset. We're talking about something in this building that could wait another month, that sort of stuff.
Right. So nothing that has a safety element or
Absolutely
a structural
nothing.
element
No.
or
So anything
redundancy?
that's safety sensitive or critical, then that hasn't been included in that. It's been things, as Stephen said, that could wait essentially to the next financial year, which, and it might be some tree maintenance if it's, we have a routine program as well as responding to storm events and things like that. So the ARB team would then defer getting in we don't do it all ourselves, we get contractors as well, is actually defer that till after July if there's some regular maintenance, as long as it's not a tree that's got, rot in it and stuff like that and it's going to fall down and what have you. So all those sorts of things, really the non-critical maintenance, which we can defer until the next financial year.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions for Stephen or Sarah? There being none, thank you for that. I'll take us back to page 49. Some recommendations in there that we receive the report, that we also approve the capital movement as identified in paragraph 29 of the capital portfolio monitoring report, that we approve the significant forecast adjustments as set out in paragraphs 56 to 58, and that we approve the revised financial strategy position for the debt to revenue, net debt and balancing the books as set out in 60 and 62. I'm happy to move that. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Deputy Finance Moko. Golly, get my head there. We haven't got the Deputy Mayor here, so I haven't offended her at all. Thank you. And to start that off once again, I will refer to being 8 days away from the end of our financial year, but that I think forgiveness to staff in terms of the workload that they're managing at the moment. We have only just finished the presentation of our draft annual report, plan, and that will go to Council next week. We have asked them to work on the annual report, and we're also asking for set up for our long-term plan discussions. And on top of that, we have the unenviable position of tough times and difficult headwinds that we're facing. Our CE is doing all the work that he can to identify areas where there can be savings, but that can indeed require that we prioritise the work that we're doing. So some forgiveness on the timeliness of reports, or that we haven't really got the information that we might have wanted in terms of May information, but that we can wait, whānau. That can happen in the next few weeks, and I'm sure as a finance committee we can trust that staff are well in advance of setting up those processes. So in that, I am more than happy to support the motion that's in front of us today. Councillor Moko, did you want to say anything?
Nothing from me, Madam Chair.
Any other speakers?
Very briefly,
Thank
Madam
you.
Chair.
Councillor Wilson.
I note with a great deal of enthusiasm clause 29 that confirmed the Waikato Regional Airport has paid its dividend of $250,000 into our coffers from last year. I look forward to seeing a much larger quantum in 12 months' time.
I'll put the motion now then. All those in favour? Against?
Carried unanimously.
Thank you. Item number 8, and we will invite Vion de Villiers to join us at the front. Thank you. Page 80, whānau. Thank you.
Good
Welcome.
Maria koutou. Ko Anita Takuingawa. I'm the Unit Manager Facilities.
Cool, sorry. Ko Vion Takuingawa. I'm the Contracts Manager. Sorry. I'm here to request permission to extend 2 facilities contracts, being HVAC maintenance and access security. I will take the report as read, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Do we have any questions? We do not. Thank you for your fulsome report, and it obviously answers everything that might have been in our minds. Thank you. I'll invite you to, again, take your seats, and I'm happy to move. Page 80, seconded by Councillor Wilson. I have no debate. You're, Mr. Wilson, Councillor Wilson? No. All those in favour? Against?
Carried unanimously.
Thank you. Now, I don't see the resolution to move us into public excluded in here, but we know that what that is. Thank you. Councillor Wilson, the seconder, Councillor Donovan. All those in favour? Aye. Against?
Carried unanimously.
Thank you. All right. What do we want to do? Do we want to stop now for a cup of tea, or are you good